Ich kann das nicht sehen, weil ich sie quasi nur... Okay. Hello, good morning and a warm welcome to our last day of the Gerd Kretschmer Memorial Symposium. As some of you may recall, Gerd left us more than a year ago. Right after that, friends, colleagues, relatives, students immediately came up with the plan to commemorate him. And what you are seeing today and here, and actually what you probably have been seeing over the week, is the result of these plans and thoughts materialized in this symposium. My name is Paul Plöger. I'm the Vice Dean of the Department of Computer Science at the Hochschule Bonn-Rhein-Sieg, which you see depicted here. And I will be happy to be your host for today, as I have been the host for this streaming during the week. So let's review what has been done so far. So we actually started on Monday morning with a talk of Professor Michael Beetz, which was very charming because Michael Beetz was a close friend of Professor Kretschmer, and so we could have a very intimate and also sort of private review of things happening during the 80s. Next day, on Tuesday, Itsuki Noda from Japan actually shed some light on his collaboration while being president of the RoboCup Federation, working together with Gerhard. On Thursday, we had another very private insight presented by our speaker from Portugal, Fernando Ribeiro. And as you can see here, the major act, of course, is going to happen today, which is the Friday, having all 8 talks in a row. Actually, it's not correct. We have 2 blocks. We have a morning session of 4 speakers, as well as we do have an afternoon session containing 4 speakers. And after the last speaker, there will be actually some extra point, which is a debate in a round table on a topic which was very close to the heart of Gerhard. So let's run through our presenters in fast way. So as I told you, Michael Beetz was talking about knowledge representation and reasoning for the robotic ages. Itsuki Noda on Thursday was talking about RoboCup 2 applications. So how do we get from sort of the tournament and the idea of RoboCup as a general to some real-life applications. Unfortunately, Dirk Holz was hindered to give his talk on Wednesday, but the promise is stay tuned, since he promised to deliver this later on. And so in our library of stored video streams, you will be able to see his contributions very soon after this. And the last one was, as mentioned, Fernando Ribeiro from the Universidade do Minho in Portugal. And this was a topic actually sort of leaning on what Gerhard liked very much, how to become an engineer, an educational point of view. But of course, these are the things which have been passed already. So let's concentrate on the things going to happen today, which is Friday. And we start with Luís Almeida, who is from the University of Porto in Portugal. And he's going to talk about robotics as a non-formal education, virtues and challenges. After this, by the way, we have a half an hour sort of slot for each of the talks. There is slack time of a quarter of an hour after each talk, so you will have the possibility to ask questions. Please note them down into the Slido box, which you find on the website where this event is being streamed. We will collect them and we will pose these questions to the presenters after the end of the talk, but you will be able to issue them right away in the very moment when the slides pass by. Okay, so this is our first speaker. Then we carry on with a live guest. So we are very lucky actually that also in these situations we were able to have some real life persons here in this room, who is going to be Gerhard Steinbauer from the Technical University of Graz, who speaks about a rather challenging topic, I think, and very intriguing and interesting one. Should we teach AI to everybody? I'm curious to find out if we should do. After this, we'll have the professor of Hochschule Bonn-Rhein-Sieg itself, Nico Hochgeschwender, talking about his research issues called Engineering Trustworthy Robotic and Autonomous Systems. So this will make it from 11:15 to 11:15, plus eventually this 15 minutes Q&A time. And finally, for the morning session, we'll end with Luca Iocchi, who is professor at the Sapienza University of Rome in Italy, talking about the organization of robot competitions and participations to RoboCup. Then we have a 2 hours break, lunch break, and we'll continue in the afternoon at 14:15 with Daniele Nardi, again professor of artificial intelligence at the Sapienza University of Rome in Italy, talking about quantitatively evaluating semantic knowledge about robot environments. At 3 o'clock, we'll have Manuela Veloso from former CMU, now at JP Morgan AI Research from the US, talking about AI in mobile robotics and AI in finance. Followed by Pedro Lima, again from Portugal, Universidade de Lisboa, talking about a control systems perspective on intelligent robots. And again, finally, we'll have again a live guest in-house here, who is Matteo Mattiucci, the professor of Politecnico di Milano from Italy, benchmarking through competition. So if we put this into an overview, you see here all talks and also all topics again in streamlined fashion. This is the morning session, this is the afternoon session, and you see here that there is at 5 p.m. 15, so 5:15, another roundtable topic which is focusing on robotics competitions and benchmark challenges and solutions. So probably the plans are that the symposium will end by around 1800, 6 p.m. So once again, let me express a very warm welcome to you. The question may come up that how did we pick these people? How did these people actually emerge to be on this list? And the answer is very simple. They were all here and they were all big friends of Gerhard. So in this picture, which is the European Robotics League, we see actually Matteo Mattiucci, we see Pedro Lima, we see Daniele Nardi, and of course we see here Gerhard. Another example is here Gerhard with Daniele Nardi, actually in this very premises. Yeah, so this was taken, I mean, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Also his wife is depicted here. Or Itsuki Noda, again in this very room, paying us a visit and paying Gerd a visit, and also being able to explain or exchange with our PhD students here in-house. And last but not least, also Manuela Veloso has been here quite a couple of times. So here we see Gerhard again, Manuela, and also here Manuela amongst our women students who are still very rare in the robotics area, unfortunately. Okay, now before we really now get the ball rolling, it's one of the few opportunities which you can have organizing such thing to sort of issue a thank you to all these EMSI and very busy people in the background which sort of never get mentioned. So I like to take the opportunity here to send them a big thank you. So here especially, let's say, depicted Iman, Santosh, Mohammed, Debul, Miriam, and Kira. And of course, we have to also thank our sponsors. One of the major sponsors of this event was the Vice President for International Affairs, Jürgen Bode. Again, a very, very warm thank you to him and all of them who have supported us. Once again, I would like to point to this opportunity for you to place your questions. So on the sites google.com, view, CyroCamp, GKK Symposium Watch, Here you will find the Slido entry to make your comments on the talks being presented by the presenters. Okay, so this is it for me for now from here. Now my question would go to our operators in the background. Is Luis Almeida already online? So can you please switch the screen so that I can say at least hello to him? Should I switch off here? No. No. Ah. Hello, hello. Luis. Yeah, I don't hear you, but maybe you can also add some sound here. I think it's all fine on your side. It's fine on your side. It's something in here. Troubles are here. Maybe while we fix this, I take the opportunity to introduce Luis. So Luis graduated and got a PhD from the Aveiro University in Portugal in 1988 and 1999, respectively. He is now with the University of Porto, and he is an expert in distributed and real-time systems, especially embedded systems. He has a very rich past with IEEE. For example, he was the technical committee for a real-time symposium in 2011 and 2012. He was the president of the RoboCop Federation 2011 to 2013. And he has big educational interests, especially in the engineering education. He will be talking about robotics as a informal educational, a non-formal education virtues and challenges. So, Luis, are you ready to present and start? Oh, his audio is not complete. So I think we have to fix the audio. There is some missing audio on your side. Can you speak? This looks okay from my side. Yeah, okay, we know from robotics competitions, it's always working sometimes. And being computer scientists, we also know that there is always something running, not necessarily what we want, but of course, so you can read me clearly, obviously, from looking from your side. So maybe can you sort of start to sing a song? No, I'm just yeah. So we sort of have an audio signal being produced. So start your talk, anyways. So there is an audio now because Luis is talking. Can we maybe have a mobile phone? How about that? Use a mobile phone instead? Aha, there was something audible.
Yes?
Yes.
Can you hear me
Yes,
now?
fine. Excellent.
All right. We were just waiting for the presentation.
I knew it.
For the slides.
Very good. So now it's your stage for roughly 30 minutes, yeah? And
Right.
please be prepared that I'll ask questions after the talk. So
All right.
enjoy the show. It's your screen now.
All right. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a great pleasure to be here remembering this common friend of ours, Gerald Kretschmer. And let me let me just start by saying that I prepared a few slides. I hope they are minimally interesting for you, but I will basically tell a little bit of my path through RoboCup and a little bit about what happened before. And so the experience I had with the robotic competitions, essentially to motivate students. So where it all started. It all started when I was graduating, and it was in 1986. I was a student, an IEEE student member, and I received this magazine that was published for IEEE student members. That was IEEE Potentials, and I found it very interesting. And there was one article one day called Design Overview of a Micro Mouse, and he talked about this competition, and it stayed in the back of my mind. And I was pretty active with some other friends in the university, and we started discussing these things. And then all of a sudden, we realized that some other people were actually proposing a micro mouse competition in Portugal for the year of '88. So we heard it in '87. And at that point, we were really motivated. And so we started, organizing a group and dividing the tasks and thinking about how to set up a team to compete in this first historical, robotic competition in Portugal. And when we were really halfway or more than halfway and sorted out already a lot of problems, then we realized that the competition had been canceled because basically there were not enough teams. So we were frustrated. And so some time passed. In the meanwhile, I graduated, and then I was some years away from university. Then I came back. I was a teaching assistant. And then in the summer of 1995, we see the light. And why did we see the light? Because there was this professor from the University of Florida, so Keith Doughty, that came to the University of Aveiro at the time to teach a course on mobile autonomous robots. And just by chance, me and other friends, we saw the work that he was doing in this course. And he was just, teaching students how to build practical robots that were pretty much reactive, very easy to build, easy to program, and really nice to, immediately, build something interesting. And we looked at those robots, and immediately we thought about the micro mouse competition. And we said to ourselves, this time we are going to do it, right? And so this is what we try to do, and we try to set up a competition. We knew that the big thing was really to make sure we had teams. And so we talked to the students that were attending the course. We motivated them to participate in the competition, and we managed to convince them. And they actually did a good job, most of them. And so in December of this year, so more or less 6 months later, we had the first competition that we called Microhat, because this is the Portuguese word for micro mouse. But we really wanted to make it, sound different, because it was not exactly the same. We were not, going by the rules of the typical micro mouse competition that we had heard before in the past. And this was just this is a picture of the robots that the students built, and it was a very simple way of organizing. There was just a closed space with some boxes in between, and the robots had to find a way from a corner through the boxes until a central area in the maze that was signaled by a infrared beacon. And it was in the middle of a dark area so that the robots could stop there. So this was very simple. I don't have any picture, unfortunately, to show you, but there was a small crowd, very curious to see what was going on. And there was a lot of buzz around this. And this was, in fact, the first robotics competition in Portugal. And what happened afterwards was really overwhelming. In the following years, we had a continuous growth of interest, and then we started having teams coming from other universities, and we had a real crowd gathering there for one afternoon to see this competition. And this was really an amazing story. And if you see the plot on the right, we see the evolution of the number of teams that we used to have. And I like to show this. You know, we started before RoboCup. sorry for saying this, but we were very happy at the time with the things we were doing. Very enthusiastic. There was a lot of energy, and then later on we also created another event that I will say a few words about it. And this was really where most of the roboticists that were engaged in competitions in Portugal met. So if you start from the right, you will see this gentleman in the white shirt. You heard him talking yesterday. This is Fernando. He was participating with some teams. Then you see here, the pictures are very bad quality. They were old, scanned with low resolution, and so I couldn't do better. I'm so sorry for this. And here, of course, he's hiding his face with his hand. I think because he didn't want me to, use his picture in the future. And so he is somehow protecting himself because he knew I was going to compromise him. But he is Pedro Lima, in fact. And then we also see others like Bernardo Cunha and José Luis Azevedo that then also became instrumental in the middle-sized league. Here in the bottom, also a very poor resolution photo, but this Carlos Cardeira that shared a substantial path of RoboCup Junior with me as well. And then here on the right, there's Paulo Costa that used to be also very much engaged in the small size league. And then here on the right, there's Nuno Lau and Luís Paulo Reis that formed the FC Portugal team that was very successful in the simulation league for a long time. So this was here on the corner, on the left bottom corner, you see just a picture of the maze and how the competition used to go. So this was really, really nice. And the question is, why did we bother to do this? Why were we doing this? Of course, well, the real reason was for fun. So we were having a lot of fun, but we were not only having a lot of fun, we were also, teachers, and we were, interested in finding ways to motivate our students so that they could feel more engaged. And the fact is that from a technical perspective, this challenge, was very rich because it required, meaningful solutions for real problems that we could find in robotics, but also in electronics, programming, embedded systems, control, whatever. And from an educational perspective, this was very interesting because we made the students work like hell, happily, learning a lot and without complaining. So this was really, really nice from that point of view. It was really working well. So we, after a few years, decided to raise the bar because this started as a small contest and it was not meant to be the Micro Hatu, a national thing. It was just a local thing. And there was really a need to do something national because there was this pressure. And so in April 2001, together with a lot of other guys, we created what was called the Robotica, the National Robotics Festival. And in the first year, actually first and second year, we had only two competitions. You see on the right, autonomous driving. And this is fun because this was 20 years ago, much before all the buzz, all the fuss about the autonomous driving that we see nowadays. And on the left, you see a new competition that we were starting for the high school students, basically line following. And it was overwhelming again, the reception that we had, the number of teams and students that got engaged. And so we kept evolving the challenges. So a few years after, the autonomous driving was already a little bit more elaborated with lanes and areas of roadworks and obstacles and intersections and the tunnel. And then we also had traffic lights. Later on, we had the normal traffic signs. So this was pretty interesting. And and then we added the RoboCup competitions as well. So we added the middle-sized league and also the junior competitions that became very strong there in the country. So if we see the evolution of teams in the early years, it was steadily going up until what we can call the golden years that were between 2006 and 2008. And then we had a small decrease, and then we had a longer decrease, essentially due to the crisis that we had after 2012. And basically, I don't have the numbers after 2013, but they basically stabilized around that. But it's very nice looking at the golden years and see that we were engaging and actually hosting in the competition around 180 teams from all over the country, and engaging between 600 and 700 participants. So this was really very nice, and we were very happy with this. But of course, at some point, we had to, cross the path with RoboCup. It was unavoidable. So Pedro Lima was already very much engaged in it. Fernando Ribeiro also was pretty much engaged. And then I had no contact with RoboCup at the time. And so Pedro just proposed us to organize RoboCup 2004 in Lisboa, right? And then he proposed this to the federation. It was accepted, and that's what it was. And so at some point, we had in our hands the job of setting up a full RoboCup competition. So Pedro Lima was one of the co-chairs. The RoboCup junior co-chairs were me and Carlos Cardeira. So you see on the right these three gentlemen. So Carlos on the left, me on the right, Pedro in the center. And then there was this gentleman that was the RoboCup junior chair that year, with a name very hard to pronounce. They took me several years to say Gerhard Kretschmer, but I finally made it in some way. And then it was very interesting that the first thing I heard about Gerhard was from Carlos, because he met Gerhard the year before in Padua in 2003, because he had been there just to see how RoboCup Junior was being organized. And then this is just an excerpt of a conversation they had that Carlos told me. And so Carlos told him, well, we are confident that we can manage the event. And Gerhard told him, well, confidence is what you feel before you become aware of the complexity of the problem, which basically meant you have no idea about what you are getting into. But well, anyway, things were not that bad, and I think it was a nice experience. But I also have here the first email that I exchanged with Gerhard, and it was a very revealing email. So the organizing committee was sending email to Gerhard and was not getting an answer. And at some point I sent, maybe it was already the second email I sent, and then finally I got an answer. And so let me read you some parts. So in the beginning, Gerhard just starts by saying, I am awfully sorry to be so quiet so far, but I am very busy. And then I realized immediately something, and that, Gerhard was really very busy all the time. And so I even, decided to draw a plot about, the level of activity. And I would say that an average level of activity of an average person would be, the lower line. But for Gerhard, it was like 2 or 3 times, higher. Gerhard was always at full speed. But, you think, well, if he's always at full speed, when we have to interact with him, he will be at full speed with us. Not exactly like that. So Gerhard was a true multitasking person. So when we were talking with Gerhard, it would be like the second plot more on the right. So silence, and then all of a sudden a burst, and then silence, and then another burst. And in each of these bursts, it was amazing the amount of things that Gerhard could, do and handle. It was really surprising. And then I thought, well, this guy doesn't rest. I mean, it must be incredible. Then I realized later on that he rests from time to time, sometimes in the RoboCup Symposium, as that picture that I took from him in 2015, Hefei in China. But well, let's continue with the email. Then he said, below my 2 cents. This was a very typical expression from Gerhard. And then I was saying something like, well, we haven't met yet, but I am an RCJ local co-chair together with Carlos Cardeira, and said, okay, I think I met Carlos in Padua. In fact, he did. And then I said, well, I still have too many doubts. Thus, below is a set of questions and the answers. Having doubts is okay as long as you can turn it into productivity and energy. And this was so fun, because Gerard, in each of his emails, had so many statements like this that you could take them, write a book with them, and I'm almost sure that it would be a success. Anyway, a few other, takeaways from the same email. Just continue. One of the questions, the first one, maximum number of teams. Is it settled? If yes, is there a maximum number per category? Comment. We wouldn't like to go much above 100 altogether due to space limitations. And of course, the answer from Gerard, well, we agreed in Blauboer, and so a meeting they had before, that it should be between 150 and 200, so a little bit more than 100. So the schedule is based on the maximum 160. Okay, we were lucky, not 200, 160. And of course, I immediately reported this to Pedro, and then Pedro went back to Gerard, said that it was not possible, and then Gerard said that it had to be, and this was, the first fight that I saw between the two. And I don't know how many fights they had during the organization of 2004. I just remember that Gerard resigned for 2 times, then he came back, and it was really an amazing time. And let me just show you just one more part of this email. And that was another question. So maximum number of fields, I guess dance is just one, and said, okay, for dance, we are supposed to use the stage, which might also be a humanoids field. So if humanoids use it extensively, we have to coordinate our schedule with them early. If the humanoids get delayed, I kick them out personally, and Pedro knows well that I will be doing that. So this is Gerard in its best. So after the first email with Gerard, I knew the person I was dealing with, and it's really an amazing person. So this was the start of a 2 years journey. So just briefly, some highlights. In 2004, I was local junior co-chair, and I entered the federation as part of the executive committee for junior. In 2005, I was the chair of RoboCup Junior in Osaka. We tried for the first time this super teams feature, in which we grouped the teams together to push the collaboration. And it didn't work completely well, but we were smart enough to insist, because it was really a good idea. And then a few years later, it was already working well. In 2006, I created what I call the junior demo. So it was a very informal mini workshop where both students and teachers could present ideas and discuss whatever. This was actually a very nice idea. I'm very proud of having done this. In 2007, I contributed also to the design of the new ball that was used in soccer, because this was really an enabler device, because we had tremendous problems with the ball that was used before. And so I carried out essentially this. The initiative was from Ashley Green. He worked with Elekit in Japan, and I was essentially engaged in the verification and testing and the definition of requirements. And I carried out what I called an RCJ certification at the time. So in 2008, I became a RoboCup trustee for junior. And in that year, I was also engaged in a MSL team. So it was Kambada, and we won. So it was a very happy year. In 2010, I became vice president for junior. And I also was part of a trial for a formal junior workshop that was actually an initiative from the organizers. I think it was Shangju that proposed it and organized, because it was in Singapore in 2010. And so there was an initial or one formal workshop in which there were formal submissions all about educational issues, and this was also interesting at that time. In 2012, I started a regular workshop on educational robotics, and we call it WeRob, and it basically replaced the RoboDemos that we had before. And this was also the end of my term as vice president. And then in 2014, the highlight was that I really helped in pushing Robo Party at RoboCup. So I thought that it was a very good idea, and it was not easy. And then we had not only in terms of convincing people that it was a good idea, but also in technical terms, also because it was necessary to take the all the robots and components to Brazil at the time, where the competition was going to be, and it was a little bit complicated. But then in 2015, I was the co-chair of the RoboCup Symposium, so this is something that has nothing to do with junior. And then finally, in 2016, I ended my term as a RoboCup trustee. And this was the end of my experience in RoboCup, the RoboCup Federation, which was extremely rich, and I have the best memories from all that period. So this is a picture with some of my fellow trustees, not all of them. So, but this was a very nice picture that I had, and so I used it. There are a few of them missing. It's also very nice to say that in 2004. I met Gerard for the first time, and he was the chair of RoboCup Junior, and I was the local organizer. And in 2016, Gerard was the local organizer, and I was one of the trustees from the federation that was in charge of interacting with the local organizers. And one of the interesting things that happened was that along these years, we got along so well that we could reach agreements in sometimes very complicated issues very quickly. So this was one of the nice memories that I keep from that period. So a little bit about, I told you that I was going to say something about, virtues and challenges of non-formal education, and particularly by using competitions. So about RoboCup Junior, I guess that most of you know, but just in case, I remind you that it's a competition that gathers about 200 teams, 1,000 participants, of which about 700 are students. It typically has 4 leagues: soccer, rescue, dance, and co-space, which is simulation. RoboCup Junior in the world, so it's the largest initiative of its kind in world coverage and teams involved. There are other ones that perhaps in number of participants are equally large, but definitely not in world coverage and number of teams. It is truly international, and certainly the largest without any professional support. And this is really an amazing thing, how something like this can be set up in a completely voluntarian basis. And it provides a consistent set of challenges. Main competitions evolve slowly, which means that they allow students to evolve their own solutions. And it mixes entry level and developed approaches. And it promotes a direct contact with research, co-location with major leagues. And I show you here this picture because these are just some examples of people that are in academia and at the same time engaged in RoboCup Junior. And so pushing for this contact between education, pre-university education and research. So Esther from Brazil, that she's doing an amazing job there. Gerard, Fernando, Shangju, and well, I'm probably the most humble of them. Other competitions that we could compare with: the first Lego League, the World Robotics Olympiad, and there are many others. But honestly, I think that this one has specific features that are really unique. It's also, let's say, a strong educational initiative. It has a tremendous potential from the educational point of view, and also to attract governmental interest. And this can also be very interesting in terms of its capacity and its potential to really, generate very nice energy in this field. Now, it doesn't, come free of problems. And One of the problems is really communication and organization. So handling all the schedules, fields allocations, procedures. I remember that in the past we failed many times, and and sometimes we fell short because doing this only with volunteers, sometimes we are not enough, and sometimes problems happened. Another real problem that was probably one of the strongest problems we had was the problem of authorship. When we deal with major competitions, the teams can use anything they can get their hands on, right? So they can get any kind of knowledge, they can do anything. But when we are dealing with pre-university, the students are naturally limited in what they know, and so some of them, they have expert parents or expert teachers, and if we are not careful, at some point what they bring to the competition is not what they did, but it's what their parents did or what their mentors did. And so this was one of the big problems, was really to make sure that the work was the work of the students. And another big problem was that we started to have many companies producing these educational robotic kits, and they were trying to produce robots that were ready to run for our requirements in our competitions, and that was another problem that we had. And then we had a big fight, and this was a problem for many years: the educators versus technicians, as I used to call it. So educators on one side, and typical teachers, high school teachers, for example, they want low complexity because they want to use this in their classroom. And the students just are with them for 1 year and they want to reuse it next year, right? And technicians are those that really like the technological things, right? And the latest gadgets, and they like to evolve, and so take a team and bring the same team over and over with more elaborate solutions, and this created a very complicated situation. This is a picture, a very interesting picture from Bremen in 2006. If we go from the left to the right, you have Pedro Lima, Betsy Sklar, with her son, me, Gerard, and Tomo, so the Brian Thomas from Australia. And this picture I just posted here because it has exactly good representatives of these two perspectives. So Pedro and Gerard would probably be these kind of technicians, kind of. So allow students to try the most recent gadgets, and Betsy and Tomo were on the opposite side and saying no, competitions must be completely different, simpler, because we need things that have to be usable in the classroom. And so here we are all together, very happy, but there were so many fights, I can tell you. Anyway, other problems: refereeing. We had the difficulties in recruiting people that were capable of refereeing with quality. Most of the times we had to rely on local volunteers, and they were not good enough, and sometimes we had problems with refereeing. Also, ambiguities in the rules, they were frequently not proofread and evolved from the same documents. Errors and contradictions tend to persist. And also the technical committees and organizing committees, sometimes they were formed by people that didn't get along that well. And sometimes there were strong personalities and weaker personalities. And sometimes there were discussions and fights, languages issues, people that could not really communicate in English or in a common language. And also different levels of technical competence and variable levels of engagement. And so this was a melt pot, we had everything that was needed to make it fail. And still it worked out. So this is an amazing thing. And I think that it worked out because we had a set of, very much dedicated people and capable. These are just very few. I mean, there's Jerry on the left, Kate Sim on the right, and Ellie Kohlberg. But there's so many more. Jose Luis Jesus, I remember, and so many others. I mean, it would be a long list. But these guys, we really owe to them the fact that RoboCup Junior survived. So which techniques were used? So basically to try to reduce stress on the competitions by ranking teams according to multiple rubrics. So giving awards not only based on the competition, but on other aspects, so that we had more teams getting compensated, and not just because of the ranking in the competition. Also increasing the sharing through the workshop on educational robotics. And we also discussed this many times, but it was very hard to make it work, to turn interviews into open presentations, but this was not really done. Add non-competitive initiatives, like, for example, RoboParty. It worked very well in Brazil, and then in Leipzig in 2016. But it didn't really go into the main line. And then basically, we also had to do something, which was basically to take the competition seriously. And I say this because this was one of the problems we had in the past. There was a misunderstanding, and the misunderstanding that lasted for many years. And the misunderstanding was that no, the competition is not important. What is important is the sharing and the spirit and learning. That's of course nice. It's all true, but the competition is important because the students were there to compete, and if they get there and if the competition was a mess, nothing would work. And so basically, we had to give more importance to the competition and take it seriously. And for that, one of the things that was very important was zero tolerance to non-students' work. And so the interviews with the teams had to be taken very seriously, and the abuses had to be penalized. And we started having teams that were disqualified, and this was really necessary so that everybody saw that this now was being taken seriously, and also to improve the structural robustness. So to give some travel support to the OCs so that the organizing committee could actually come and organize properly the competition, to come up with a pool of international volunteers and referees that were already capable of refereeing with quality. And something I believe, never got. I don't know now, but at the time it didn't exist. But it would be really awesome, would be to have some permanent office. So in conclusion, robotics is indeed a powerful didactic tool, not only for research. It can be used to motivate learning and to teach. Competitions can push students from all ages, from primary school up to university level, to experience doing, right, to try things. And still, running robotics competitions for kids is not free from difficulties. No free lunch, and they really have to be taken seriously. So I finish, with two images. On the right, you see a keynote talk that Gerard gave last year in April in our Robotica, where we also have an international conference, the SciCarsk, and he was a keynote speaker. And this slide is exactly, a glimpse on the evolution of some robotics competitions. We know how Gerard enjoyed this topic. But of course, then I teased him because this list is not complete. Our competitions are not there. But then I also had to show you the picture on the left, because these gentlemen that I show here are probably those that shared most of the path, all these years with me, and I really need to thank them for all the companionship, all the discussions, and everything that we accomplished together. So thank you very much.
Oops. Thank you very much, Luis, for this very personal and also very fact-rich remembrance of the activity of Gerhard. I still would like some questions to you. So, for example, you started out by describing that you were initially driven very much by a hardware close approach. So robots were built by the students, and so they could really sort of be pushed or motivated a little bit into the direction of electrical engineering, for example. On the other hand, you also mentioned that reliability and robustness is a very big issue. Like if you want to use something in class, of course, you need something to rely on. I mean, the teacher would not be a perfect debugger or engineer. The teacher would just need some teaching means, yeah, and they of course need something reliable. And so there is a huge gap in this, yeah. So like there are different directions. One is of them attract the sort of very motivated one, build your own hardware, be fancy, do what you please. Yeah, it's a very creative and inspirative thing. And on the other hand, you have this, can we get robotics close to the huge masses, to the lay persons, to the average pupil in class, having an average teacher? So this is really a torn thing. What would be your recommendation here? What should we strive for? What do you think is the best way to go?
Well, honestly, both ways need to go. I mean, and this is what we saw with RoboCup. I mean, in RoboCup Junior, we felt this tension because we had this tension because the people that defend each of the ways are different, and we had both at the same time engaged in RoboCup Junior, and they were pulling in different directions, and we had several clashes. We had major discussions. I remember when we were discussing the evolution of soccer, there was really almost a disruption, and I thought that that would be the end of RoboCup Junior at some point. But I think that the richness, one of them, there are many, but one of the rich points of RoboCup Junior is really because it managed to keep these two groups together. So once those big fights that we had in the years of 2007, 8, and 9, and then we sorted out, and we managed to have entry-level competitions, and at the same time competitions that were more evolved, that allowed at the same time simpler approaches like the approaches of the classroom, and at the same time complex approaches like the approaches of those that like to explore the latest gadgets. And finally we managed to have them both together and keep them together, and this is something that I believe is really a plus from this event. So yes, it's really good.
So it's, after all, it's making compromises, right? I mean, you cannot there's not a single right way. Well, this leads, of course, now to Gerhard again. Yeah, I mean, you were pointing out the, let's say, opinionatedness of him, or this pushy kind of argument thing.
Yes.
So maybe I like this, to pose this question to you. Well, if this is true, that he was so opinionated, how could it be true that he ultimately was very successful with many different people? Because all of the people which we are talking to today will sort of say, yep, it's sort of not evading any debate or battle or whatever. But wasn't there something at the end? I mean, wasn't there not always something like a compromise or some motion or some... Is it always that the other opponent lost the debate? Or is it like, I mean, ultimately, Gerhard could give in?
I can tell you that Gerhard could give in. Yes. I can tell you many times. And I think that this was his strength.
Yes.
I mean, Gerhard was really an intelligent guy, not only because he was, intelligent from the scientific point of view. He was, intelligent because he could understand when he had to give in. And actually, he many times he went way over, the line, and he said things that he shouldn't have said. And he was, I saw him being very inconvenient, very much inconvenient, many times. And then it had to be me, trying to fix, the mess. And I had to do it many times because, we had so many problems sometimes created by these,
yes.
actions of Gerhard, and I think this was really actually one of the points that brought us together more, because basically I felt that at some point I felt respect because I had to make Gerhard understand that he, went way over the line.
Right.
And then I think that he started to, this created kind of a very, I don't know, but a very interesting relationship. It's something that became very personal.
Yes.
But really, I can tell you that I saw Gerard giving in many times.
Right, right. So maybe this...
And it was nice because these conflicts actually reduced along the time.
Right.
So I think that Gerard, after 2000, let's say maybe 12, something like this, really softened with respect to the Gerard that I knew before. So this is also true.
I think now this may be a very good stopping sentence, yeah, to keep actually this memory which says, yes, it was not only the battles, but it was also the giving in, and at the end to be successful together. So I thank you once again, Luis, for your very interesting and personal talk. So saying the session now has actually a little time left, but we will come back to our symposium at 10 o'clock. So for the audience, please stay tuned. So for the coming 4 minutes, we're going to change from Luis Almeida to an online guest live here in the hall, namely to our guest from the TU Graz, Gerald Steinbauer. And please stay tuned. We will be back in 4 minutes. Thanks for your attention.
Eins, zwei, drei, test.
Okay, welcome back to our next guest on our symposium for Gerhard Kretschmer. It's going to be Gerald Steinbauer from the TU Graz, Technical University of Graz. His research interests are software engineering and AI, mainly to improve the functionality and the working of autonomous robots. He has been active in RoboCup for almost 2 decades. Especially, he was the general chair of the 2009 World Championship conducted in Graz. And ever since, he was also very interested in RoboCup Junior and has been a trustee since 2017. The talk right now is going to be about the topic, should we teach AI to everybody? I'm really curious to find out if we should. It's your stage, Gerald.
Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction. Also, Paul and his team for organizing this memorial symposium for Gerhard. When I was asked to give the talk here, I looked into the schedule, and it was interesting. I'm exactly in the middle of my favorites. So Luis talked about RoboCup Junior and this type of education, and Nico will talk about dependability of things. So the question was, what should I talk then? Because we have already 2 experts here in that. That's not a problem, because I can do a little bit of a bridge in between, because what we started in Graz a couple of years ago is looking into early stage education of AI, and that's a little bit I want to talk about. And of course, there's also a big connection to what Gerhard did in RoboCup Junior. Okay, the question is, should we teach about AI to everybody? Everybody is more that our students we have usually at the university. It's about kids outside the university and the schools, but also the general public. And Luis already pointed it out. What I like in RoboCup was, and this is the quote there under the pictures, is that it was also always about promoting the research and development in robotics and AI. And that's there since 1996, 1997, because nobody else really talked about AI then. And for us, it came completely natural that this is 2 disciplines which belongs together or are more or less a synonym for each other. And of course, and that was already what Luis said, is in AI research, we had this problem in the 90s that it gets a little bit bored with chess, for example, because we had good search algorithms. And then the nice idea was to move on to interaction with the real world. And that's what the story of RoboCup came out at the end of the day. So that was a good start. I will not talk a lot about RoboCup Junior. Briefly to go what Luis said, I'm still thinking that it is a great vehicle for STEM education. And as Luis also said, it is somehow a trademark worldwide for educational robotics. I disagree that we are the largest one. There are other coming up, and yeah, that's basically 2 problems I see here. In my opinion, we lost a little bit of uniqueness over the years because there are so many offers this day, and in particular in the crisis time now, there's a lot of online education, online competitions and so on. We have to keep on evaluating it, and it was nice to see how RoboCup Junior was developed by Gerhard and his colleagues. But at the end, I have the feeling it is, there was the discussion also at the end of his slide, it is too complex, or the topic is too hard, so that it is still, in my opinion, it's somehow a lead program. And where we fail is that we really have made a connection to the formal education system. Yeah? We want to push RoboCup and RoboCup education, or educational robotics into the schools, but we fail to some extent, so it is still a lead program in most schools, depending on how dedicated the teacher is. And we have different countries where it works out quite well, like, for example, Singapore. But there is a question of size. I mean, if you reach all your schools within 10 minutes with your underground, then it's different. But also Australia is very nice, at least in some states where Cherry is, for example. There it is well established in schools. I see this as a problem. But it is a quite good blueprint for doing things. And that's the problem we face at the moment, because AI is a big hype at the moment. And you see here, in your perspective, it's on the left. It is the site of the European Union and networks like Alice, that they see AI as everything, and everything is within AI. Huh? Robotics people don't like this, because for us it was totally clear that robotics and AI is something on the same level and work together. And that's the problem we also have to communicate. Otherwise, all the machine learning people working in big data will dominate the stage, and robotics, which is basically one of the starter where AI was applied, is getting lost of attention, so to speak. Okay, and why I and my colleagues started to push into that topic also, beside RoboCup Junior, is, yes, it is an important aspect at the moment, if you like it or not. It is in our daily life, and we have to cope with it. On the other hand, it's quite evolving fast at the moment. It's even as a researcher, it's hard to track what's going on. But on the other hand, if you look around what kind of products, challenges, or startups coming up, so AI enables a lot at the moment. But the downside is it is a little bit of a myth, and people not really, even researchers, understand what is underneath. And also the fear is quite high, what to do and what to expect from AI. Yeah? And that's basically the starting point where we started the following. And this is a quote. I mean, there are sometimes Austrians, they are quite clever in what they say. So that's Maria Eber-Eschenbach. And she thought it sounds better in German. The translation is not so good, but she was a German writing person. Those who knew nothing have to believe everything, right? And in particular in these times, when you look at what discussion we have about Corona in the social media, you have the same problem with AI, right? You should try to inform and educate people that they can make a dedicated guess, yeah? Or informed decision, right? That's the problem we have now. Okay, and when you go into education or early education or broad education of AI, then you have these three contexts. In my opinion, you have the social the social aspect, you have the working aspect, and you also have the economy aspect. The social aspect is exactly what we said before. I mean, we should people allow that they have the knowledge and they are educated well, that they can part of decision processes, of discussions also on the political level, because what we want to do or what we want to shape AI is not us as a researcher, it's also a community one. And if you are working in a supermarket, usually you're not well prepared to follow the discussion. The other thing is, of course, work. I mean, there will be more and more jobs in that area. And this allows you to have a living. And we also have to prepare people in that perspective, and that's what we do on the university level anyway. But the question is, can we do it earlier? And finally is, of course, we need to stimulate ideas more, what people can do with AI in order to make new products, new markets. So from that perspective, this also contributes to our nice style of living here in Europe, at least. Okay, so what is our claim? So we want to distill this in a kind of AI literacy. So robots is or AI in our life all the time. And we need to bring together the general people or young people with this technology. and also teach them at least the fundamental concepts, like reading and writing, and that's basically why we claim it as a literacy, right? And if we do that, we have to be careful, because even if we go to school, at least in Germany and Austria, you don't reach all the people, even if they are older, let's say 16 years old, because we already have the system that people go to the company and being educated there and not in school, how to reach them. And I don't speak about the general public, which is hard to reach for us anyway. And the understanding is needed of this new technology, basically. So what we did the last 3 to 4 years is we established the so-called European driving license for robot and intelligent system. It was a European-funded project we started with 4 years ago. And the idea is that we want to build up a course system and an education system, and also provide material, certification, everything in the area of AI and robotics, which allows us to be more engaged with the formal education, basically, because of the reason in society, work, and economy. And you see already the similarity to the ECDL, the European Driving License for Computer. Driving license that was exactly the idea, that you have also a certification at the end, that if you go to a company or make an application to a university, you can already use this as an asset, because what you have learned is certified, which is not the case if you make an informal education in this area. Good, and it should be taught at well ground, so it should be taught in a way that the complex and sometimes non or counterintuitive concepts of the AI can be also brought down to youngsters. Yeah, I said this was a 3 years project as a start, and we already get a continuation. That's good. What is the target group? That was quite interesting. And here we have a large overhead what we are doing also in RoboCup Junior, because the target group is, first of all, the trainers. So we not only focus the students, because we don't have the capacity to do it on a broad scale, so we need something which scales up. And to some extent, that what we are doing in Austria and also in Europe and other parts of the world in RoboCup Junior is exactly that. We address and train the trainers, the teachers, mentors in clubs, and allow them to go forward, and works as a multiplier. And then, of course, we have the trainees. And you see already here, we're not having explicitly students. In terms of high school, we have also apprentice, and young people in general, because I think it's more important to go out of the school as well. Yeah, we have this multiplayer approach. So what we did is we took into also people from didactics, from high school teacher education, and talk with them as AI reachers. Okay, so how can we break down the complex topics of AI, and how can we teach them in a way that it is really appreciated by people between, let's say, 12, 13 to 18. And this was quite nice, because we came up with nice ideas. And of course, there's a lot of things going on these days. And you can do it from paper and pencil to programming to build something. There's very nice concepts. And we came up with a nice training and certification system we'll see in a minute as well. Yeah, and then we first went into a phase where we just educated teachers. And that where we were lucky, we were enrolled, and this is together with Hungary, there's the same, because it was a cross-border project, that we were hooked up in the official education or of the teachers. They have to do a training every year, and that was good because this is a multiplier. And then we trained the trainers. It was quite surprisingly how low the knowledge in AI is in this group of people. And they were really like a sponge that they really get input and informed input from somebody who not claims to be a AI professional, but is it to some extent. Yeah, and they also ended with a certification. So, and we also gave them as an asset, when they have done their certification, they can use our material for free, and they get everything for free as long as they also provided the education for free. And then we went into the phase where we educated the people, the youngsters, and this was done partly by us, but already happened in the schools, and it also ended up with certifications. I have to speed up a little bit. So the modules that exist at the moment are the AI, basic and advanced, as well as robotic and advanced, and also the certification system for that. But I have to say, of course, there's a lot of material out there and a lot of courses out there. I think what makes us unique is the preparation of the course, together with people who know how people learn. And the other thing is also, and I will tell you a little bit later, is that we had an advice report which helped us that this really is established in the school system and also be recognized by the industry. And what is the difference between basic and advanced? This will we see in a minute. Is basically one is a fundamental understanding that addresses basically the society issue, that people can follow a discussion on the political level about AI or on the European level. And the other one already, the advanced one, goes to making a career. So here, for example, we have exactly the example. So the AI Basic does not require any prior knowledge, which is important because if you go out to the woods, to the wild, you cannot tell them, hey, you have to know discrete mathematics. This will not work out. So. And there is basically cultural and creativity issues in there. Also, of course, there's ethics and all these things in there. But it's on a very soft level. It tells you also, okay, what does a neural network do? What is planning? What is search? And all these things we are using, but on a soft level. And on the other hand, we have the advanced, where it really goes in the direction that you have a problem you want to address with an AI technology, and you should be able to use these tools and also build up a little bit more complex system or AI system for solving that. Just to see what we started with a quite formal development of a curricula that was driven by the people who came from the didactics. So usually you start with the core competences you want to achieve, or learning of objectives, basically. So, for example, here is already nice. One is able to describe and recognize an AI system. So what is something else, and what is an AI system, for example? Where, of course, the boundary is a little bit soft, because where does AI end and something else starts? Knowing the application area, so where is AI embedded already, that they see that, and what is also the social, technical, and ethical and legal implications. And it still should be there, at least at the soft ground, that they have understanding how they formulate a problem and solve it with some AI techniques. And at the end of the day, we make a little programming with Python so that they can use libraries, so that it works out quite fine. Good. Here you see we have this blended learning already. This was pre-corona already. So we have online and offline or face-to-face sessions. And you see here we have 5 days in presence, which is basically the maximum you can give to a teacher or to a school, because otherwise they will not adapt it. If you go too short, it doesn't have an impact. If you say, okay, it's 6 months formal education, then everybody skipped. And we use quite nicely the online session, for example, to fresh up mathematical concepts, programming, or also let them go into their own community and check, okay, what AI systems they see when they walk around. Okay, a lot of effort went into the certification because the idea was that we have not only the course, but we have a kind of approved assessment at the end of the day. And there we did a quite nice move. So we hooked up with the national computer societies. They're usually doing this. And the important thing is they are neutral, yeah? That's not a university, it's not a Hochschule, it's not a school. So they are somewhere in the middle, and if they do the certification, that's fine. So they get the questions, and we develop this certification with them, and that works quite fine. And at the moment, it's basically an online test. We're not able, I mean, for AI, it's not so important, but for robotics, there's a little bit tricky, and you might all know that it's not so simple to do really nice online simulation where you can do something in the cloud. That has to be improved. But the real good thing is we were able to have an advisory board where we have people from the ministry, from the educational bodies, as well as from major industry, and we talked to them and say, okay, when we came with the certification that I have learned AI, how can this be an asset? And that works at the moment because it is somehow an agreed certification there, and it is done by the Austrian Computer Society. Okay, this is just a few numbers. We have about 600 participants over the last 2 years in the ramp-up phase. You see we have a couple of courses. I think it's 50 in all different target areas. Interesting is, and that's still much better than online courses, we have at least over 50% really finalizing the course and getting the certificate at the end. I don't know it is for free education, how many, or online education really stay to the end at the end, because this is, I think, or I believe, by pushing also the face-to-face component. So people probably more dedicated then. Okay, but I also promised in the abstract that we look a little bit about from us, and I want to give you two quite orthogonal examples as well. We are not the only, obviously not the only way ones they're doing that, so there is also others doing it. And this is information from Dave Turetsky from the CMU. So they have the AI for K-12 initiative. And basically what they do, they have even higher stakes. They want to have really a national guideline for teaching AI in K-12. K-12 is what is in Germany the Abitur, the graduation from high school, and really go there together with the teachers and develop different grades, really nice models for what you can teach there. And they define that, and also in a formal process of really having a good curricula according to the age of the students. And here I'm a little bit skeptic, because that we hear for many, many years, also in the context of RoboCup Junior, is having good online resources teachers can use. There's still a lot of out there, but still teachers struggle to check, okay, is this really a good material? Is it state of the art? Is it stable? Does it really work? So there's no quality standard. So at the end of the day, many teachers are still depending on trying something, and if it fails, try another one, and they cannot really have a standard. So we'll see how this works for the AI as well. And they're looking also for a whole ecosystem, including research, workshops, and so on. For example, we had together with them already a nice workshop at the last ICHKAI on the education, where I was really proud to have a workshop at ICHKAI on this topic, for example. And the nice thing is here, and I kicked out one slide before because it's too long, They came with the big 5 ideas in AI, and I like this picture quite well, because you see here, it is quite general, right? So we have perception there as section 1, which is obvious. We have to this perception and understanding the world. But the nice thing is also they have 2 already, representation and reasoning. Because nowadays, and that's really annoys me because I came from the formal AI or symbolic AI, nobody talks about that. Everything is machine learning nowadays, but there's a little bit more. Yeah? And all these good old-fashioned things like search and problem solving with search are still there. That's the nice thing with these 5 ideas. Then obviously we have learning there. Of course, it has its place. And of course, it's also for RoboCup very nicely is then natural interaction. So interact with the world, because AI isolated from the world is not very nice. And then we have the social impacts. And if you look, and I just copied from a longer presentation. So here you have, for example, the learning object, explain how images are represented digitally in a computer. Then people have to learn about the representation, and you can also do it, for example, if they are elder, for example, about signal processing if you talk about speech. The other one, it's completely other concept, but quite successful, is elements of AI. I'm quite sure that many of you are aware of it. It is basically an online course, was done by the Finnish, and it was quite successful. And there we have similar aspects, and this is really for the general public. So you have what is AI, but you also have problem solving, for example, the search, real world AI in the term what are applications, machine learning, neural networks, and of course also the implication ethically and legally. And this is from Frederik Heinz from the Linköping University. I get the latest numbers. You see here, this is a completely different scale, right? So World Up, they have, and now you see, they have only 10%, right? So there are about 600,000 people sign up and about 60,000 completed. Huh? That's the problem with these online courses. And the nice thing is they franchised it to many, or the Finnish franchised it to different countries, and Sweden took it over, and you see that they have quite successful in re-implementing and replicate the results. And the major aspect is, of course, there's also German version now, that the general people are not speaking English that good that they can do an AI workshop. So that's the point. So you see different ends, right? Really formal education, broad education, these 2 examples. And then I think I'm already to the end, conclusion. So yeah, RoboCup, in my opinion, united RoboCup in the robotics and AI. That's nice to see. We should also emphasize this more. RoboCup is established STEM and educational robotics framework. But in my opinion, and probably Luis will disagree, it's, in my opinion, still a niche program, and it has to be more put it into the formal education. And we have to go through the same process RoboCup Junior went through, or educational robotics went through. We realized that it's an important technology, but we need an early and broad education for it, because otherwise, as I said, we have economic and social problems. And it allows participation, not in the sense that you can make this course. It makes participation in the political discussion and the political process, which is much more important. And what we have at the moment is there's too many cooks around. There's too many initiatives at the moment. We will see who will be successful at the end of the day. But on the other way around, we already saw this in other places. Go you up, bottom up, or you go down, bottom down, you will see what, top down, what will work at the end of the day. And coming to the end, the answer is question is yes, we should educate AI to everybody. Thanks a lot. I hope this still works if you came closer.
Yeah.
Mic.
So we can keep a distance and wear a mask. I mean, this
Okay, then
it
let's keep
cannot
a-
potentially be safer.
Okay, then it's easier for me.
Yes. Yeah, so thank you for the interesting and challenging talk with the answer yes. Yeah, okay. So yes, we should do it. And I think you mentioned also nice tricks to make it work. So my first point would be, how did you convince this community to accept it as a certificate? I mean, because for that you need to push your societies of computer science or whatever to say, here we are doing a good thing. And were they just, I mean, upfront saying, yeah, okay, we believe in you, because of course, ultimately the certificate has to have some value.
Yeah.
And this value is given to this by general acceptance of the audience, or by, well, society maybe even. And so the question, how did you make it work that they say, yeah, we sign in?
There was 3 groups, and they were differently complex or hard to address. Surprisingly, the most open people were the computer scientists, this computer community or societies by themselves. There was not much convincing necessary. We said we made this, and they saw it and say, yeah, that's a good idea. We have similar concept for other fields, so there's no worry, we will do it. The midterm was the companies, because at the beginning they mixed it up that they will get an AI engineer at the end of the day.
Oh, okay, okay.
And then we had to explain them, hey, the first stage is about that people at all understand it. And this you can also send us your apprentices, for example, dedicated general basic knowledge.
Right.
And later on we have getting in that you have an additional
Okay.
asset.
An asset, right.
Asset.
I mean, okay.
So that was okay. And the last really tricky was, again, the teachers.
Oh, okay. The teachers, yeah.
The usual problem, you have this 5%, they are anyway
convinced, yeah, they're
they
early
con-
adopters, right?
or dedicated very much.
Yes, yes.
That was out. But the other one, it was really a lot of talking to them
Right.
and convince them.
But now you have something like positive feedback in the sense of, after this acceptance rate, actually the ball is rolling, and so maybe even those who require it ask for, do you have a certificate in this sense?
Exactly. That is one half of the medal, and the other half of the medal is really that it gets spread now.
Okay.
And one school have it, and the others are, why we don't have it?
Okay, that's competition, right?
Yeah. So
that's a good news,
yeah,
right?
this plays in our hand
Right,
at the moment.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very, very intriguing. There's another issue, and which comes to my mind, namely, do you? I mean, sorry that I lost track because there's a web question right now, right? But
Okay.
yeah. So no, but the point was the didactics. Yeah, you were talking about that you get in touch to these professionals for educational things. And in Germany, this is sort of 2 worlds. Yeah, so usually you have, let's say, deep science, hard science, natural sciences, and so then soft science, let's say, which is sort of the pedagogical, more inspired things. And it's a deep ridge between them. There's sort of a real separation. So was it easy to get in touch to them? And lastly, did you benefit also for your own lectures from it, right? I mean, so because you, of course, now you were pushed to make things work because you have this audience, you learn some new techniques, you get into contact to something, maybe get some other ideas and stuff. And so could your lecture ultimately also benefit from this contact to this pedagogically inclined persons?
The contact was quite okay. I mean, they were interested, and we got the common ground very, very quickly. But this is also because my university is anyway making half of the education of the teachers for computer science in Austria. So we already cooperate with them.
Okay.
And of course, we learned a lot how to really came from what I want that you know, how I teach this.
And how
this was really beneficial for us.
Okay, okay. Or is it free?
That's exactly I mentioned it briefly, that's exactly the point. If you as a teacher or a mentor in a club makes the education and get a certification, then you get all the material for free, as long as you also offer it for free. Because we had cases in the past where people went into the courses and then wanted to make a benefit out of it. And that's we don't want to make. And we make anyway everything public because we got taxpayers' money anyway.
Right.
So it belongs to the community anyway.
So right now you are also running the online services, because you were talking about online services and certification. Are you doing
That's
this?
exactly the only exception here is there's a small fee for the certification, which is basically for running the certification, the certification database and all this. But this is done by the Computer Society. That's not our business anymore.
And of course now sorry.
Well, I'm not standing here and saying I'm the absolute expert in ethics. Huh? But how can they deal? I mean, from the European Union, there is a lot effort done in the last times to make this framework. There was a lot of discussion about it, who does it and who is an expert to do it. But at the end of the day, this AI was a friendly face, which is basically the AI, how we want to do it in Europe. I think that's fine. And from that perspective, also policymakers have learned what we meant. And you can really take this AI guidelines to communicate with the policymakers.
So, but then, I mean, also coming back to what Luis this morning said, also you mentioned it. So, do you think it's now more creeping towards it is entrenched to schools, or it becomes an official part of something? Yeah, so that you really, because I mean, Luis, I thought maybe you mentioned that you failed for RoboCup in making it a standard idiom for the school training. And now you have sort of a side initiative, which I mean, not directly aimed to schools, but I mean, you can address various other social parties in your community and your society. And by having this impact, it may become more a standard thing, a must have, yeah, so that you should be pre-educated for AI as such. And it looks like that you actually created some momentum to make also the teacher maybe aware to ultimately accept also RoboCup or whatever junior things to be something like a part of their everyday teaching. Do you see hope there in this direction?
Well, I see hope because the teachers really feel they have to do something there.
Okay.
There's a lot of discussion and that there's like an elephant coming and they need to do something. So from that perspective, even the lazy teachers know that they want.
Okay.
And two things to add here is the other thing is, of course, we need both. We need to go to the public, but we need still the schools because that's still the biggest lever. Right. And the other thing is, it is also in the teaching or the school systems are quite conservative. So, but here is hope that it's a matter of time, because now more and more really good educated computer science teachers come out of our universities.
Okay.
And they will take it over and they are socialized in that way, but this takes 10 years.
Right, yeah, you have to think big scale.
And
right.
The biological teacher that hosts the computer in the school, they will retire soon.
Right, okay. Okay, maybe I have a last very critical one, because you started with two things, AI and robotics. And I buy the AI part still here, and because you were also pondering on online teaching, online certification and stuff. Of course, this will become very difficult for the robotics part, right? I mean, so how do you intend to spread out the good news about making a robot run really, having wheels and debugging and stuff? Because, I mean, you have this twofold program, right? One was on AI, you covered this very nicely, but the other part was sort of a little bit open, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, that's a real problem at the moment, yeah. And if your lab is closed and you cannot do it, anything, it's really bad. So, I mean, there is a tremendous progress in simulations. They're getting better on all level. You have, for example, Roberta on that's a very good.
Yeah, yeah.
It's basically from here.
Yes, I know.
But it goes up to Amazon Web Servers where you can develop robots, so that's quite nice. And the other thing is, what might be interesting is, and this is probably refashioning an old concept, you might have remote access to a real device.
To a real, remote labs sort of thing. Yeah.
That's the natural development there.
Okay, so are there any more questions? Okay. Yeah, last thing, personal memory to Gerhard.
Well,
again, do you have an anecdote or something which never leaves your mind or which always comes to mind if you think about Gerhard?
Gerhard, yeah, we have quite a long, and when I came here, I had time to think about it. And one thing is really remarkable. We started in 2003 together in the mid-sized league. At that time, he was in Ulm with the Ulm Sparrows. And it was interesting because at that time, they had the robot framework Miro. It was done with Hans Utz, Enderle. And it was really, and this shows also the passion from Gerhard for record software engineering for robots at that time. And this was 2003. There was no ROS at site. But at the end of the day, everything what ROS had was in there, and to some extent even better already. But of course, it was just 3 RoboCup teams using it. There was no funding around it. That why it died out, and then ROS became a standard practice. But Gerhard and his team was far ahead.
Yes.
And to his problem-solving skills, man, I was 2009. I was general chair of the RoboCup, and this takes you at least a year and shortens your life at least 5. And Gerhard was our contact trustee. And Manuela Veloso was the president at that time. Yeah? And she was quite dedicated in what she wanted to do. And Gerhard was quite a good buffer in between. But it was really that he had this capability to turn chaos into energy.
Probably this is a perfect ending. Thank you very, very much for this last shared insight on character attributes of Gerhard. Thanks again for the talk.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So nice having you here in person. So very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, so there are now actually 2 minutes left. So maybe I can already take the opportunity to lead over directly to. You will break? Okay, so let's wait for 2 minutes. We will be back shortly in 2 minutes. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back to the next talk in the Gerd Kretschmann Symposium. We are going to have a talk of Nico Hochgeschwender, who is from this university, Hochschule Bonn-Rhein-Sieg. He started out in Ravensburg-Weingarten, and after that went actually to software industries in 2006, ESG in Munich. 2009, he joined HBRS as a teaching assistant, finished his PhD at the University of Luxembourg in 2016, joined DLR Aerospace, German Aerospace Research Agency in Cologne in 2018, and ultimately returned home, quote unquote, to the Hochschule Bonn-Rhein-Sieg in 2019, becoming a full professor here. He's going to talk about engineering trustworthy, robotic, and autonomous systems. Nico, it's your stage.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for the nice introduction. And it's really an honor to be here, and I'm really delighted to take part of this memorial symposium because I share many memories with Gerhard, and let me say that I'm not only sharing now memories by myself, but also by many fellow students and PhD students and students working with him, because I was a research associate working with him in several projects, and so basically I can somehow also represent my fellow friends and fellow students. So I will go along some roles Gerhard had before I'm gonna start to talk about my research topic in a minute. So let us remember Gerhard. So first of all, we certainly miss him, and Gerhard, to make it bold, was a great advisor. Yeah? He was not only for the master students but also for the PhD students, and I mean, obviously, his scientific background is known and his expertise is known, but also on the personal side. Yeah? And I go through the pictures and to give you some examples how he actually supported us as an advisor. So what you see here on the left is a picture in the Yosemite National Park in the US, and that was 2011 when we participated in IROS. One of the major robotic conferences, and we had a good justification that we were such a large group of people there, because we had a demonstration with the Carobot robot, we had a paper, we had a workshop paper, we organized a workshop, and then Gerhard came up with the idea to say, well, let's make a road trip out of it. Yeah, and he was very attached to the United States and to California, and then he spent several days to finding out a good route through California. So we started in San Francisco, we drove to LA and then back, and along the way we visited many different labs and different research institutions like NASA and UCLA and Stanford and so on. And that was really remarkable, and it was really also enjoyable. Yeah? And I'm really thankful, and all the team here, like on the picture, like Fred, Chris, Jan, and myself are really thankful for this nice experience. And he was also actually very supportive in this regard. Yeah? So he actually at IROS, for example, it was the first time for me at one of the major robotic conferences. He introduced us to many different people, and it was not like that we were just there, but he really also established an atmosphere to make contact with other people. And in this regard, he was also very supportive. What you see here on the right, on the top, of course, with the RoboCup team. Yeah? So whenever they had a question regarding, for example, financing and so on, he really worked hard to make it happen. And this is also, in a sense, a relation to my talk title, trustworthy. So he was really trustworthy in particular in critical situations. Yeah. So as you know, it's an international master program, and when it comes to hire people and so forth, you need to have a statement from the professor that this person is working here and that you need him and so on in order to get the permit to stay here. And he was really, really responsive in that regard. And I think many students can confirm that. And personally, I'm really thankful that during my PhD examination and defense, actually, he made it happen that he participated, yeah? And because at that time it was already not so clear whether he could make it. But of course, he was also a researcher, and Gerhard Steinbauer mentioned it in his last statement. He was very influential in the field of robotic software engineering and introducing solid software engineering principles in robotics. And he was influential in the BRICS project, Best Practice in Robotics, which was a European-funded project, which, to the best of my knowledge, was one of the first really European level projects dedicated to software engineering in robotics. And of course, other speakers already mentioned that his influence on several European funded projects in the context of scientific competitions. And what I like here to say is also that he trusted us as PhD students. So he gave us a lot of responsibility, yeah. So, for example, for myself, he said, well, there was this big discussion of, okay, now how do we introduce model-based approaches in software engineering for robots? And we came up with this BRICS component model. And because there was a lot of discussion going on, and he proposed then to the consortium that I should lead the task force, so-called task force, to lead this activity. And I was a young PhD student, and I got a lot of responsibility organizing meetings and collecting all the different opinions and shaping a meta model out of that. And that was, on the one hand, scary, yeah, but on the other hand, I'm thankful that he actually trusted in all of the PhD students so much. And having said that, he was, as you can see here on the picture, a guy who you cannot push him around. Yeah? So he was a big guy, and you could not push him around. But he was also tall in the sense that he had an overview about the different fields what are going on. So he was not very narrow focused. He had also the skill to actually look beyond his field. And I think that is for PhD students really helpful also to experience that. And last but not least, Gerhard was also a good fellow. Yeah? He always enjoyed nice dinners, and also we stayed long in bars when on conferences and had fun. And the same also for the master program here. He really always enjoyed the different parties, and he was really supporting it. Not only by attending, but also by providing self-made stuff. Yeah. Okay. Having said that, I would like to move on to a bit more research side of my talk, and the relation here with Gerhard is that when we discuss the software engineering aspects, we always said, okay, what comes next, and for why is that actually required? Yeah, it's why is it required to introduce solid engineering principles? And we both agree that we need some unique key selling point. And I think the selling point here is really that we say, okay, we need these principles and methods and tools in order to develop robotic systems which are trustworthy. And when you now look, and Gerhard mentioned the hype about AI, but on the same side we have also some kind of a hype in terms of robotic and autonomous systems. Yeah, so what you see here on the ground are just some typical robotic systems, of course not complete. So we have autonomous driving, we have drones, we have collaborative robots, we have personal robot assistants and things like that. And so we could say, okay, well, that's great, but to each of these systems we also can attach some headlines which are not so motivating. So sorry, oops. Something. Sorry. So and these headlines are not actually related to the term trustworthy in the sense that we can rely on something to be good or honest. But they are more related to things which should not go right. So we have all these cases mentioned in the media, like accidents with self-driving cars, for example, or when you look, for example, to the Pepper robots. Some people say it's astonishingly insecure, potential cyber weapon. So people can hack the systems, and we can take pictures of people which do not want to have that. And the same also for drones. So we have accidents with drones, partly remotely controlled, but partly also semi-autonomous. So there are some negative associations also with those systems, and this is what we do not want. We want to have that these systems work in a trustworthy manner. So I said we want to introduce solid engineering principles, and as an engineer, what you usually do is you look into a design space. So what are the design decisions you can make in order, in that particular case, in order to make your system trustworthy? And the first thing is actually that we should look into the different facets of trustworthiness. And I think that goes a bit beyond what is known from dependability. Of course, we have here facets of trustworthiness such as safety and security, which are known from the dependability domain. But we have also new facets of robotic systems, which should a robotic system have in order to be trustworthy, such as resilience, namely the ability to recover timely to, for example, unexpected events, or also transparency, the ability to discover why, for example, the robot behaves in a certain way. And so these are the different facets of our design space. So now the question as an engineer is, okay, how do we actually achieve that? And for that we can actually introduce different mechanisms, which I call, which are known from other fields, for example, from classical AI, but also from software engineering, such as, for example, proper process models, means to monitoring activities, means also to learn, means to adapt your system at runtime in order to compensate, for example, unexpected events, means to introspect its own behavior, but also its own capabilities or deviations from its own capabilities. And then, last but not least, another dimension which is really important when it comes to engineering trustworthy system is actually to consider actually the stakeholders. So who are we addressing for, and who is actually affected by the ability of trustworthiness or by the lack of trustworthiness. So I will go now through I pick some points in that design space and will introduce what are some latest research what we have done in the field. Let me start with the aspect of transparency, so discover why it behaves in a certain way, and we are targeting end users, and our mean to achieve this transparency is through introspection. So we are interested in developing autonomous service robots which are capable of performing a wide range of different tasks. So let's assume here we have this Pepper robot, and some examples of tasks which you could imagine are like patrolling the building for checking Wi-Fi signal strengths, or escorting visitors to meeting rooms and informing visitors about the institute, for example. And Pat Langley wrote in a very nice AAAI paper the scenario of an action after action review, which somehow nicely demonstrate what we mean with transparency. Yeah. So here I'm asking the robot, what action did you consider when escorting Bob today? And then the robot gives me a very informed answer. So we built up on that example and wanted to improve the transparency of our autonomous system. And the idea is we started with the task of first assessing what is the robot actually capable of doing. Yeah. So what can the office assistant actually do for me? Let's assume you're a new PhD student or a new worker in your institute and you have this robot driving around and you want to know, okay, what can you actually do for me? For a classical technical system, we would maybe start reading an instruction manual, yeah? But this is in the case of such a robot not a good option, yeah? Because what we want to have is that this robot is capable to extend its capabilities, yeah? So new tasks are added to the robot, and also the execution of the different tasks change because the environment is dynamic. Yeah? So the idea what we developed here is that we develop a conversational interface which where user can actually ask concrete questions the robot about its capabilities. Yeah? So for example here, so where are you located, what can you do, and things like that. And in order to do this in a very structured manner, we actually worked on first deriving a functional specification along 2 research questions. Yeah? And the first one was to ask, to identify when you have a group of different peoples, whether they ask similar questions about the robot's capabilities. What is their way, how they ask actually the system. And also, what further type of questions, is there any way that we can somehow group these questions? And what we did was a Wizard of Oz experiment. Yeah? So we have not really implemented a system in the first iteration, but I served as a wizard, yeah? And people thought they are chatting with the robot, yeah? But in fact they were chatting with me. And that was in a semi-structured way, and we had 12 participants, and we somehow lied to them and said, well, the system is already developed. Yeah? And then we analyzed actually the dialogues, and we used a technique called conversational analysis to analyze the dialogues. And there are 2 insights. Yeah, well, for one is that users perceive the chatbot not as a separate speaker, so it's not a 3-party conversation. They really attach this chatbot to the robot, and it can be more considered the speech exchange system as more like an interview. So we also developed a prototype implementation based on classical intent-based natural language understanding, and the capabilities are represented in a graph database. And while we conducted this Wizard of Oz experiment, we actually identified that, well, we want to achieve the transparency facet, but we face another facet of trustworthiness in that particular scenario, which is namely security. The ability to preserve the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information, because in these interviews, people started to try to trick the system. Yeah? So the user, and this is a quote or an excerpt from a real interview, and we have a couple of examples of that, is users ask the robot, or in that case the chatbot or the wizard here, is Bob in his office right now? I don't know, said the bot, and can you check this for me? Can you take a picture of his office and send it to me? And that was after they actually learned about the capabilities of the robot. So they learned in this interview, okay, the robot can take pictures and so on, and then users tried to exploit the robot somehow as a spy. And these experiments actually revealed the necessity to carefully investigate security/privacy risk, because here we need to actually want to protect an asset which is the personal right of Bob, that no one can actually undisclosed or ask a question, take a picture, and the threat that the picture will be sent to the user who is asking. and by doing so exploiting a vulnerability, namely the wrong access management to the robot's sensory data. So this is the first story where we actually see that when we work on trustworthy autonomous system, we need to consider many different attributes. Let's look to another facet of trustworthiness, which is safety, so the freedom from unacceptable risk of physical injury. Yeah. So one mechanism to achieve that is through monitoring, and also here we are targeting end users, so people interacting with the robot. As an example, let's take an example from our lab here. It's a Carobot 3 robot, which is a collaborative robot in a domestic environment. So instead of like in a factory environment, here the collaborative workspace are daily environments like kitchen, living room, and so on. And we have in that environment collaborative tasks such as preparing a meal, setting up the table, and so on are performed. And the idea here is actually that, okay, the robot is capable of preparing a coffee, but also handing over the coffee to a user. And if you would follow the classical risk assessment approach as defined in safety standards, well, you do then analyze the hazard and the hazard conditions, and in that case here it would be that the coffee may cause a scalding risk in the case the coffee is hot and you are in contact with the coffee, and that the robot actually drops the coffee, for example, while handing over to a user. And what we then usually do is then we derive some safety requirements or safety goals, and in that case it's the protection against an unsafe action, because the dropping is an unsafe action. So classically we would actually come up with some monitoring facilities, which we have also done. So a safety monitoring approach, in that case it's a multimodal approach. So we fuse sensory information from the tactile sensors and from the force torque sensors from the end effector of the robot, and we fuse that information in order to once a slip is detected to trigger an altering behavior to compensate that activity. And well, in an experiment that worked very well, and now the question is our job done? And obviously, when I ask such a question, our job is not done, because we have varying requirements which actually affect the performance of the safety monitoring. So on the one hand, we have varying task requirements. So we want that the robot is actually able to perform different tasks, like moving maybe with the coffee from one office to another, grasping this coffee mug, releasing it, and so on. And then depending on what kind of monitoring strategy, because I mentioned that we're going to fuse different information, one is better than the other. And this is on the task side, but also from the deployment or from the platform side. So there are varying requirements concerning the proper functioning of these safety monitors. So, for example, when we want to detect a slip with just the force sensors, it's a very timely activities, then this piece of software should be deployed on a platform to which the force sensors are connected to, and the same holds for other properties like certain memory requirements or timing requirements. So, having said that, again, here we need to consider different other aspects of trustworthiness. And in that case, that is actually reliability, because the provided service, namely the detection of slips, should be done correctly for a required period of time. Not only when the robot is handing over the coffee mug, but also when the robot is actually transporting the coffee mug from maybe, let's say, one room to another. And in order to achieve that, we need to introduce another level of mechanisms, and in that case, this is adaptation. And here the question is how now the robot is capable of autonomously deploy the safety monitors in the presence of the varying requirements. And here we actually use the mechanisms of monitoring to actually monitor whether there are varying requirements. And then we need to equip the robot with the proper knowledge about its capabilities in order to do an adaptation. And the first thing is actually we here employ domain-specific languages to specify the architectural and software side of our system. In that concrete case, how is this safety monitor structured? What is the data flow and so forth? And here we use a language, the robot perception specification language, to model these architectural concerns of the safety monitors. And then we attach to these specifications also some deployment information, such as the deployment requirements, as seen here below. Okay, but now we have specified the system, but this is not sufficient, because this is just the design time knowledge. So we now need to equip the robot also with more runtime knowledge in order that the robot is autonomously able to answer questions such as, okay, which platforms where I can deploy my monitors have enough memory for example, the tactile safety monitor that it can be deployed there. And what we do use here are we separate and bring together. First, we separate it by specifying the design time aspects, and then we bring it together with the runtime knowledge which is required for such a task, such as what kind of memory is available, how does our system look like right now, what is currently deployed, and so forth. And we use a labeled property graph approach where we have explicit links between this design time and this runtime knowledge. And having that knowledge and such a knowledge representation, we can now equip the robot with querying mechanisms, that the robot is actually capable of querying, okay, what are our requirements and which platforms fulfill my requirements. And those queries, they are very self-contained, and they can be now used in different deployment and adaptation algorithms, which I'm not going to present here. I'm like to refer here to the corresponding paper. So, in summary, we saw the different facets of trustworthiness, and interestingly, we can apply principles of mechanisms to different facets of this design space, and we always need to consider what are actually our stakeholders. Are we talking about end users? Are we talking about developers or integrators or even authorities? Because authorities might not be fully interested in how your system works, but they want to have an assurance on evidence that it does work. And for that regard, we need to introduce different aspects and different methodologies. So, but relating that to Gerhard might ask, okay, what about benchmarking? So, and I think that is a really interesting point, and I think maybe that is also a contribution maybe to the afternoon's discussion, Benchmark is all about to compare systems, and to then maybe also to select a certain approach. My take here is that we should do the same also for the properties of trustworthiness. And I think that is really an open question. How we actually do that? How do we benchmark robotic and autonomous systems from the perspective of trustworthiness? And I give a short outlook in the metrics project, which actually Gerhard wrote or contributed to the proposal, and which I have now the pleasure to serve as a PI here, is that we are working here in the domain of healthcare robotics. So the particular competition addresses tasks that directly impact the user's well-being in complex and unstructured environments, such as in an at-home environment. And so obviously there are different functionalities required from a functional point of view, different functional components required. Robot should be able to grasp, to manipulate, to interact, and so forth. But it in such a safety critical environment, while interacting physically with people, we need a strict validation of the safety of the robotic behavior. And I just give an example. Let's assume you want the robot should give a person some healthcare related objects such an infusion pump or a pill box or something like that, and we cannot expect a lab environment, and people working in the lab are very much aware of how the robot behaves. So there might be a situation in the wild that maybe the human actor might drop objects or does not respond at all to the robot. And how does the robot now interact with interacts with such a situation? And that is an aspect of safety, and that has been not yet fully studied. And we try in the Matrix project to go a bit into that direction by actually, first of all, collecting a data set with certain failure situations, and with coming up with some taxonomies of, for example, interaction failures in this handover task, in order to then have a solid ground in order to also compare and benchmark different solutions. Thank you.
We turn our question or the attention to the question from the web. Thank you for the very interesting, intriguing talk. So actually, you mentioned probably the most interesting and intriguing part at the very end, when you're talking about benchmarking, Gerhard's most beloved topic potentially, and you funneled it on the trustworthiness, but I think it's even more problematic if you just leave trustworthiness out and you just talk about what should the TÜV be for an autonomous system, right? And because autonomy, of course, will require in itself that it is actually not deterministic. Autonomy means there is some deliberation for decisions to be taken. Now, and this deliberation, of course, can go various ways. I mean, it's not really clear, because otherwise it would not be autonomous. Otherwise it would be sort of pre-programmed, which is not what we are after. We are after autonomy. And so there is something like an inherent clash of things. And I would like to at least already maybe shed some light for this afternoon discussion on this aspect. So what do you think, what would be a way to address benchmark versus autonomy? What is your feeling there? What should we do?
I think, first of all, it's a very good question. I think we are now entering this age of autonomy, and we need to carefully rethink from the older times, quote unquote, what are the good practices which work there? Right. And obviously, there are airplanes are flying, trains are, cars are driving around, and there are very well-established methodologies and also tools available. So, from a pragmatic point of view, my first approach would be that we carefully look into how far can we actually push these existing methodologies, in order to provide assurances for these autonomous systems. And then carefully isolating also, where is the deliberation actually going on, and then find out, okay, these interactions with the rest of the system, because traditionally this has been done already. So in a car or in a train, you have certain components which are extremely safety critical, yeah, and where we actually even applied formal verification, model checking, and these kind of things. Yeah, whether they work for our autonomy components, I doubt to think. But there are methods actually or procedures how to approach that. Yeah, and I think that is required. It's where actually is the deliberation going on, and where is the impact? So pinpointing it to and isolating it. Yeah, and then somehow build a sandbox around those components, which actually are where actually the deliberation is actually going on.
So to summarize, you bet on good old engineering traditions. Yeah, like, I mean, identifying the problem, chopping it down, making boundaries or something. But then inside here, there is, of course, something very new.
Yeah.
But so the method to approach the problem should be actually like from the quote, or very subtle and sound engineering ways to solve problems in general. There is actually a question from the audience.
Yep, so there's a question from the audience is a general, why is robotic system lacking trustworthy? An alternative like a mobile phone, which also has a camera, has an AI, is accepted by the people as still being accepted. Why robotic systems lack this?
So do you have the headphone?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but the mobile phone is not interacting physically. Yeah. Yeah? And I think that's the key point here. Yeah? All the kind of systems which I demonstrated have some physical embodiment. Yeah? And our physical world is extremely rich. Yeah? Extremely uncertain, and that's, I think, is the take there. Yeah? To really differentiate between existing technologies, like a mobile phone, for example.
Yeah, okay, I have another one. Of course, in a talk which is close to AI or somehow related to AI in one way or another, and you mentioning actually knowledge bases, you mentioned the design time knowledge as well as the runtime knowledge. Of course, the question comes up, first of all, how are these knowledge bases filled? So is it filled by learning? And where do you see the intrinsic difference between this design time and runtime knowledge? I mean, are both of them fluid or flexible, or is the design time knowledge more like static one, and the runtime knowledge is sort of completely open-minded or something? Or what is the main difference between these two knowledge bases?
So the design time knowledge for me is always the starting point. Yeah? Yeah? From the engineering perspective, because we are still constructing the systems, yeah? We still make these design decisions. Yeah? So then we should also make these design decisions explicit and put it into our knowledge representations. Yeah? This is always the starting point, but it's not static. Yeah? Yeah? Because either through adaptation, learning, or experiences, whatever, this might change. Yeah. But it's always the starting point, and I see a natural connection because as this design time knowledge is not static, it's dynamic. Yeah, it is informed also by the runtime knowledge. Right. Yeah. So it's a way of modification also.
And learning? So is there learning? So
in the kind of systems I considered so far, not yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think for the generally speaking, yeah. In fact, there are. I have not shown that, but there are systems where we actually already also collect certain experiences about task achievements, for example, what went wrong and what was, and that information actually is. By collecting it, we can later exploit it for learning. Yeah?
So, for example, in the NLP example, I mean, you mentioned this dialogue system at the beginning. But for that you used, I think, WhatsApp or something. So the NLP was sort of given. This was given. It was not learned or trained. It was just as it was.
Yeah, it was through the interviews which we conducted and so on. We identified certain intents. Yeah. And then we used that information to actually learn an intent based. But there is some learning actually.
Learning systems. Okay, so let's have a look. now there is a little more time left actually, but as far as there are no more questions from the audience, no, there are not. So then I again
Thank you very much.
For this interesting talk. And right now it's 25 minutes past 11. So we're going to continue at 11:30 with the talk of Luca Iocchi from the University Sapienza in Rome. Stay with us or please come back at 11:30. See you there and then. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome back. Hello, Luca. Good to see you again on screen. Before you actually start your talk, I would like to give a very brief CV of yours. So Luca is currently from the Sapienza University of Rome. He did 1995 his master's in engineering. 1998, it's his PhD in computer science, all at this very same university. After several research stays in Stanford in the early 2000 years and the University of Caen in France, he was finally appointed full professor in 2019, also back home, quote to say, at Sapienza University of Rome. Currently, he is the vice president of the RoboCup Federation. His special research interests go into the direction of benchmarking. He likes the at-home league very much and also the European Robotics League, also here in the direction of service robotics. And today and now he's going to talk about the organization of RoboCup competitions, of robot competitions and participation to RoboCup, a scientific perspective. Luca, it's going to be 30 minutes. It's your stage now.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Very good, very good.
Okay, very good. So it's a big pleasure for me to give this talk in this symposium. And I would like to highlight the scientific challenges and the scientific contributions that comes from participation to RoboCup competition. So in previous talks, we have seen how difficult it is to organize a competition, how nice it is to participate. Here I want to focus also on some scientific aspects. And I want to start from 1997, which is a very important year for AI and robotics. And there are these three events that happened in that year. So the first one was that a computer program, Deep Blue, defeated the world chess champion Kasparov in a real tournament. That was a great success of AI at the time because it was not believed that AI could actually win against human intelligence. And now we know that there are other challenges that have been, let's say, won from AI machines, but that was the very first one. And then the same year, there was a nice success of, let's say, more the robotics technology in which a rover was able to land on the Mars area and to do some missions over there. So these are very nice examples of successes of AI and robotics, but they're not really merged together. The Deep Blue was mostly AI. It was a computer program, very nice, in which there were AI techniques in order to compute the next move. And the Mars Pathfinder was mostly a robotics component. There was very little AI. In the same year, in 97, there was the first official competition of RoboCup. And the main goal of RoboCup was, since the beginning, to really integrate AI and robotics. And because in order to make robots playing soccer, it is important to have both the physical presence, so the physical realization of the robots, as well as the intelligence that would allow the robots to take the right decisions. Another important things that happened in 97 was that the Ulm Sparrows project was started. I'll come back to this later on. So I think that I want to start from here. So what happened in these years that the RoboCup community fixed this very challenging program to have to build teams of robot soccer players that could actually play in a real environment, with the main goal to have these players, these robotic players, to play against humans soon, very soon, eventually, at some time. So why robot soccer is an important scientific challenge? Because it contains a lot of elements that are still nowadays very important in the scientific community. So first of all, we are defining a multi-robot adversarial problem. So we have two teams of robots that are competing to reach a goal, and the good action of one team will be bad for the other. So it's a really adversarial environment. But it is not only an adversarial environment with with this feature, but also with the real-time feature, because the soccer match happens in a real environment. And so you have to consider all the real-time issues that arises when you deploy these robots. So at that time, there was a very nice comparison between the chess challenges and the RoboCup challenge. And I have to say that right now, after more than 20 years, we still have that the RoboCup challenge is still very actual, and it's very important. And there are not yet real solutions that make these challenges solved. So what has been the first years of RoboCup, 97, 99? First of all, there were only 3 leagues, and then the legged robots was added in 99. And these 3 leagues were about soccer simulation, small-sized robots. So soccer match with robots of small size and middle-sized robots. And the first 3 events in Nagoya, Paris, and Stockholm, they saw an increasing number of teams and more importantly, an increasing spread over the many countries. And just to give an idea, in 2016 was one of the largest events in the last years. We reached more than 400 teams for 45 countries. So how this happens? So why RoboCup in these years developed so quickly? I think because there has been a very good combination of organization of the competition, participation from the teams, but also special attention to the dissemination of these events in the scientific community. So it was very nice for me to take the opportunity of preparing this talk to read some papers that were published in 97, 98, and 99, to which Gerard contributed, that gave an overview of what happened in RoboCup 97, 98, and 99. And these are very interesting and invite all the, especially the young students and young researchers, to read these papers. They are 20 years old now, but they're still very actual. There are still many interesting ideas and interesting challenges that you can read there. So in these papers, what is very important that the authors were able to make RoboCup known to the scientific community. So papers were discussed and were presented at, for example, at IROS or at very important journals like AI Magazine. And so the scientific community knew about RoboCup. That was very important. And in my opinion, this was one of the key success elements for RoboCup, to have many authors that were able to explain to the scientific community what was RoboCup. And also, I have to say that, so in the middle sides, for example, just to give you an idea, in 97, there were just matches in which a few robots were able to really go behind the ball and hit the ball. In 98, the competition was much better. And in 99, we can see that some robots were able to perform quite well. So people could really see robots playing soccer. And this is an example of the game that we had with between our team, the Azzurra robot team, and the Ulm Sparrows, that is Gerard's teams, in 99. So you can see here that just after 2 years, or when the challenge was launched, there were research institutes over the world that were able to actually solve the problem, where at least they can able to deploy robots that are able to follow the ball, to kick the ball, to react, but also to reason, understand what is the right action to do at any time. And again, RoboCup 99, I think it was a great success because it was co-located with the most important conference in artificial intelligence, and the report of the overview of RoboCup 99 was also very important because, again, it showed how this competition can bring important elements for the research. And let me go and analyze one particular paper, that is the technical report of the Ulm Sparrows, that shows a very interesting approach in integrating AI and robotics. So at that time, so in 97, I was a PhD student. I was also studying this field. I was reading a lot of papers, many papers about robot architectures, how to integrate AI in robotics. And I always wondering how this could be really implemented, because in many papers, let's say before RoboCup, I was just reading the paper, but I had no idea how exactly this could work. And RoboCup has been very inspiring for me because I could see this architecture running in practice. And so this is an example. In this paper, you can read the architecture that was used by soccer robots in '99, in which you can see, for example, here, the importance of a behavior-based architecture. And here the idea is that the deliberative layer is responsible to take decisions in a multi-robot environment. The robots have to take decisions. They cannot just run after the ball, but then you have to integrate the behaviors in a proper way. And here you see an example of how to integrate all these behaviors in order to make effective soccer robots. What is also important for RoboCup is that together with the competition, we have the RoboCup Symposium. That is a venue in which researchers, after the RoboCup competitions, they can discuss about technical and scientific solutions. And this is very important for us because, as I mentioned, we really need to push the research in AI and robotics, not just to win the competition. Of course, winning the competition is important, but it's also important to understand why there is a progress in the competition. And so the RoboCup Symposium has been very important because it's also, I have to say that papers in the RoboCup Symposium are very cited because they are papers coming from the community and are useful to the community. So I always invite students when they have faced a problem that has been considered in the RoboCup, in some of the RoboCup leagues, to look at the RoboCup Symposium, because here, proceedings, here you find papers that describe what are the solutions that have been actually tested in the real environment. So all papers that are in the RoboCup Symposium, they are not just theoretical papers, but they show what actually was used in, during the competition. And, okay, and we have these proceedings that are published every year by Springer, and Gerard was the editor of one of them in 2000. And so his contribution was very important also here. Now, about RoboCup Junior, already Fernando yesterday and Luis this morning mentioned how important is RoboCup Junior, because you know that people who will, the researchers in 2050 are now students in the high schools, or maybe even in the primary schools. So I will not spend more time on RoboCup Junior because many things have been already said about it. I want again to make an example of how publishing papers about RoboCup Junior has been very important in order to make this competition well known in the scientific community. Okay, then, as you know, RoboCup is not only soccer, and there has been other leagues that have been created in the last years. RoboCup Rescue since 2000, the RoboCup at Home since 2006, and the RoboCup Industrial since 2012, where RoboCup moved to more application-oriented fields. They are still a challenging fields. There's still the idea of doing research in AI robotics, but in different domains. And this comes because, of course, we have many domains in which robotics and AI can give important contributions to the society. So I will briefly go through some of these leagues to give an idea again of what are the tasks, but also in particular what are the scientific results. And so RoboCup at Home is a league in which the main goal is to develop and deploy service robots that can be helpful to humans in everyday life. And in particular, in the RoboCup at Home, we have an apartment environment and many different tasks in which the robots have to cooperate with humans in order to help humans in some of these tasks. So RoboCup at Home is very difficult because there are several tasks and all the tasks are different, and it is very important to put together many components in order to make the tasks solvable. It is not possible or it's not convenient, for example, to create a particular program for each task. So here I will show some example of, in particular, the winning team from 2009 that again published a paper in an important journal in AI robotics describing what is the architecture that has been used in the robot that won the competition. And again, here we find a very nice idea of integrating AI robotics, different from what was presented in the previous paper, because now we are more than 10 years after, and there are also more new techniques. For example, in this environment, in RoboCup at Home, it is very important to have an explicit knowledge of the situation. So the robot has to understand what is the situation and how the situation evolves, and to do more sophisticated reasoning. So in this paper, there is the description of an hybrid deliberative layer using description logics as a logics to model the knowledge of the robot about the environment. And you see here all the components that are needed to update, to keep this knowledge updated, to reason about the knowledge, and to choose what are the right actions in order to execute the task. This is, again, a very clear architecture that shows an effective integration of AI robotics in a practical system. Then I want to say also a few words about RoboCup at Work, even if I'm not very familiar with this competition because I was more involved in RoboCup at Home. But it's very important that RoboCup at Work also has been developed since 2012. And I have to say that here also Garrett's contribution was absolutely fundamental. And what is important is that the competition was not shown only at the RoboCup, but also, for example, at IROS. So in 2012, the RoboCup at Work was shown at IROS, which is, as you probably know, one of the most important conferences in robotics. And again, it was very important to see that other communities outside the RoboCup were understanding what is the importance and the challenges behind this competition. And again here, I just had a look at the paper that was published by the BitBots teams that participated and won several prizes in this competition. And here we see another aspect of integrating AI robotics, something again more recent, because this is a very recent paper. And here we see a clear distinction between planning high-level actions and low-level robotics components. And in particular, we see that the use of, let's say, more modern planning and plan execution technology, including PDDL formal specification, PDDL planner, knowledge base that is updated from sensing, and the plan execution based on ROS plan. So again, this is very interesting and inspiring. It shows, in a way, also the evolution of the architecture for integrating AI robotics. And in this particular case, we see, again, applied to the specific task of RoboCup at work, how we can formalize the problem and how we can provide a solution in which there is a clear integration of AI robotics. Okay. So I want to go quick because I want to not to go over my time. Robot competition are not only RoboCup, there are many other competitions. And in particular, we have been involved in several European initiatives in which the competitions evolved and merged with benchmarking. I think this will be subject of next talks and the next discussion. So I don't want to take much time here. I want just to mention that their contribution also to the European Robotics League, to ROCIN, ROCU2, SHIROC, have been very, very important, in particular in the definition of new challenges for service robots and professional robots. Okay, now let's go back to RoboCup, in particular to the great challenge of RoboCup, which is human against robots. In one of the talks in the previous days, there was a question about if humans are better than robots, and the answer is yes. And humans have better agility, can provide better movements in the environment, have better obstacle avoidance, but in particular, they have more human intelligence, meaning that they can, for example, understand much better what is the situation in the field and to coordinate with each other. Let me show you this video about RoboCup 2010. So here you can see a great save, and this is something that requires a lot of agility that robots do not have at this moment. Then we have evidence of great obstacle avoidance from the humans. You see how humans are very good at avoiding robots in particular. And then the human intelligence. You see in this the coordination of humans that can easily understand the situation and take the right decision. I have to say that now we are 10 years away from this RoboCup 2010, and there are now robots are getting better and better, and so who knows what will happen in 2050. So let me summarize a few success factors of RoboCup in my opinion. The first one is that RoboCup has been designed and is always carried out with a clear scientific focus for problems and solutions. So whenever we have any discussion at the RoboCup trustees meeting or in the exec meeting or when the leagues discuss the rules for the competition, we always push the scientific focus. Then another important aspect is that we have a very large and diverse international research community. All people that are involved in RoboCup are well known in the research community, and there is an important diversity in the people that are involved. And thanks to this, I think that RoboCup has a very high reputation in the international scientific community. Everybody knows RoboCup, and maybe not all researchers are willing to participate to RoboCup, but for sure the scientific reputation of the RoboCup community is well known. And last but also very important is that RoboCup works because there are many volunteers that dedicate their time and their enthusiasm in participating and organizing the competition. So this is very important because the RoboCup is a non-professional organization. All the people that are involved are just volunteers that just give their support to the competition because they believe it's a very important research challenge. And so Gerard for sure has been a perfect example of this because he dedicated more than 20 years to develop RoboCup in many areas from the beginning to increasing the scope of RoboCup in terms of new leagues, but also in terms of dissemination. And so it's a big pleasure for me to announce that RoboCup Federation decided to present the RoboCup Distinguished Service Award dedicated to Gerard. And this will start since this year. So the first award will be given in RoboCup 2021. And the award will be given to recognize the outstanding contribution of people with exceptional leadership, service, and dedication that benefit RoboCup in any of its leagues. So it's a big pleasure for me to announce this award that will be given in memory of Gerard. Okay, so I think I can get to the conclusions. I think that scientific robot competitions bring exceptional opportunities, especially for young students. First of all, you find here relevant research challenges, and you'll be able to demonstrate significant results. So if whatever you are studying works in RoboCup, this is a really significant and relevant result. There is opportunity to have great experiences with colleagues and students. So RoboCup is it's a kind of big family in which you compete against the teams, but you also collaborate. I've seen many times teams helping each other, even if they are competing. So helping another team may be of a disadvantage for one team. Usually in RoboCup, there is a very friendly atmosphere. And last but not least, of course, by participating in these competitions, we have the opportunity to make friends that we will never forget. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Luca, I have to thank you for this indeed very, very personal as well as factful talk about the impact of Gerd to the community. And devoting a prize to him is, of course, now a news which we didn't know before. But I mean,
that was the surprise element of this.
Yeah, thinking it over, it's just a brilliant idea. Honestly, I'm very much moved by your decision actually to push this forward to make this happen. So this will, in this sense, be a standing symbol of his impact, and I'm quite moved by this. So it's really nice how you identified him as a driving force, not only in the committees and all the activities he has been doing, but also that you found traces also in the scientific publications. I mean, you cited a lot of papers, which I honestly almost forgot. I mean, although I'm being a co-author, but good that somebody mentioned it actually, I have to say. So very, very nice, and yeah, tons and thousand thanks to this. I really think this is a very, very nice move. Yeah, and now I would like to place at least one question to you. So, of course, also being in this leagues, yeah, so mid-size league and at-home league for quite a while, there is, of course, now a motion, or there's a movement going on. I mean, you traced back the history quite a bit, and in the early days, one could say, in some way, it was not that much about AI, but it was possibly something like integrating clever sensors. Yeah, think about the ZIG laser scanner. At some stage, the ZIG laser scanner dominated the scenery. Yeah, like, I mean, everybody who got a ZIG laser scanner was able to win games or something. Of course, you still needed to integrate, master, model, yeah, use probabilistic techniques and so on. All this, I mean, it was not a free lunch thing. I mean, so this is definitely an accomplishment. But one could, of course, say, well, maybe the winning was more due to this sensor rather than the AI behind it. And maybe this has changed today. So what is your, I mean, if you compare it to this, let's say, yeah, this was, I mean, 2000 or something. And now if you trace it for today's, is the impact of this AI-driven approach, this scientificness which makes things successful, is it more clearly visible in today's leagues? What is your opinion on that?
Yes, I think it is for two reasons. One is that maybe 20 years ago it was not easy to access sensors, sophisticated sensors. So in RoboCup 99, there was only one team with laser.
Yeah, I know. I don't mention the name.
Actually, but anyway, they didn't win. So, I mean, it was not enough. And now this is not anymore the case because we have, let's say, chip sensors. So we have software that can easily integrate sensors. So I don't think at this moment a team would have problems in acquiring the sensors that are needed. The second part of the answer is that in particular, RoboCup at Home and RoboCup at Work, we pushed a lot the advantage of using high-level definition of tasks. Right. So in RoboCup at Home and at Work, there are 10 tasks that you have to do. They are all different each other, but they combine the same elements. So it is not convenient to define 10 programs, let's say one for each task. It will be too complicated. So in this way, you are forced to create reliable components, general purpose components, right, and then put together these components to solve the tasks with some AI. So that's why I think now we are in a situation in which AI is much more important. Okay.
Do you see also benefit from cross-breeding and merging leagues? Like, I mean, the logistic leagues going to at work or merging to at work, so that there would be a common momentum for both leagues to sort of integrate new problems and make it, in quote unquote, more realistic.
Yes, of course, merging leagues would be useful, but before merging, merging is also complex from an organization point of view. There is, let's say, cross-feeding of ideas. So many leagues take ideas from other leagues when improving the rules. So there are some techniques, but also ideas that are moving from one league to another. So yes, absolutely. Of course, leagues are important, and the evolution, for example, in the exec meetings that we have at RoboCup, we always push leagues to talk each other in order to understand also if there can be components that can be put together by more leagues.
Yeah, I mean, my extreme example, of course, would be the simulation league versus, let's say, mid-size, or together with mid-size. Yeah? So there are some statements saying that simulation league is something which is closest to real soccer, in the sense of you have all this anticipation, you have this limit of reach of communication, you have learning going on while you sort of study the strategy of your opponent during the first half. You sort of do a very big machinery learning and use in the second half an adaptive strategy to sort of beat the component, because you learned from the observation in the first half, and so your opponent could be beaten in the second half because you adapted to it while training. And now, can you imagine something like this for the mid-sized league, for example?
Let me first make the example on the humanoid leagues. So at the beginning, the simulation league and the real robot league were too different. So it was too difficult to take something from one and bring it to another. Now, we have the simulated humanoid league, the 3D simulation league, and for example, the standard platform soccer league. Now, in the simulated league, they use a model of the now. And there are teams that have been participated both in the 3D simulation league and in the standard platform league with the real robots, using most of the components, and sometimes even using behaviors that are learned in simulation and then are transposed in the real robot. So this is possible in the standard platform league because we have a simulator that is quite realistic with respect to the real world. Now, in middle size, maybe it's not yet the case. Maybe it could be useful to understand if we can create a simulator that can better model challenges that are faced by the real environment.
Yeah, I'm also, of course, asking in the direction of motivation for the students, because right now we are very much swamped, let's say, quote unquote, by students who are very much driven towards learning, machine learning, deep vision, and so on. And of course, I somehow get the feeling that maybe this bridge between what we were doing before with respect to AI and what is sort of the current hype in AI is a little bit missing. So that sort of the deepness or this learning aspect is maybe not as much present as the students, or we would need it to attract even more students to join the competitions.
So I think that data-driven approach and machine learning are, of course, perfect for, let's say, for perception, for understanding the situation. But in order to fulfill the task, you have to take decisions.
Right.
Now, taking decisions with machine learning is still very, in my opinion, far from robotics. So we have good examples in video games where reinforcement learning can learn how to play video games. But video games are still scenarios in which the agent has perfect knowledge about the environment, which is not the case in RoboCup. So I think that when we see at the perception side, then for sure machine learning is a great tool. For example, RoboCup at home and RoboCup at work, now all the perception are done with some kind of convolutional neural networks or so on. But still, the robot has to take decisions. And for this, we still need some more, let's say, classical or symbolic AI.
Right. Okay. There's a question from the audience, actually.
I think this question, Professor Kretschmer would have definitely loved it. It's saying, because of the difficulty of RoboCup, many teams encourage a quick and dirty or a hacking solution rather than a general solution. So how do we avoid this push of research in the right direction?
Yes, I think one good answer is, again, the example of RoboCup at home. If you have 10 tasks to solve, it is very difficult to hack 10 programs. And having that 10 programs will individually solve each task without a good, let's say, software engineering approach. So I think what is important, also outside the RoboCup, when every young researcher designs an experiment, is to think not to one experiment, but at least to two. So to not show in a paper that the robot can do only one thing, but at least two things that are not completely different, but at least related. If you think about the robot doing two tasks instead of one, you will have to face this situation, and you will discover that hacking the solution for one task will not work for the other. So maybe a suggestion is that whenever you do the experiment in a paper, let's try to do the experiment in 2 different tasks instead of only one.
Yeah, this sounds like a convincing answer to me, at least. I would do it, of course, the structured way rather than a hacked way. And I think this would be very much into the spirit of Professor Kretschmer, right? To actually sort of do a sobering design. I mean, sit down, get your act together, and only start implementing after understanding what the problem is meant for and how it is entrenched into a more general setup, maybe. Okay, so if there is no more question from the audience, then I like again to thank you, Luca, for this inspiring and very, very good news, and also for your very nice talk. So
thank you very much for the organization.
Yeah, I would. I mean, just saying, I would have loved to chat more now about these issues during our lunch break, which is actually coming up now. But unfortunately, because of the situation, it's not possible. But anyways, it was a big pleasure to have you here. And for the audience, I would just remind you that we are going to continue now after the lunch break at 2:15 with a talk of Daniele Nardi. So please stay tuned, come back, and see you in 2 hours. Thanks very much.